Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Eileen. I'm joined by Gideon. We will introduce ourselves shortly, but thank you for tuning in. We're just going to give everybody another minute or two to get into the webinar link, get their audio settings set up, and maybe a cup of tea as well. How are you this morning, Gideon?
I'm really good. It kind of doesn't feel like autumn yet, so I'm
Oh,
kind of
I think it does.
really,
Yes. What, you're still in summer vibes?
yeah. I just kind of hate getting cold and wet, and
Yes.
I'm sort of like psychologically just keeping it all at bay for the moment until it really happens. And like as I was leaving the house this morning, I heard murmurings about putting the heating on, and I kind of just took my jumper off and showed everybody that it's still really hot. So
I see. So it's not that it doesn't feel like it's autumn for you. You are just in denial.
yeah, I'm in
Yeah.
denial about
Okay.
about it, and I want to keep that going until like March.
Okay. Well, maybe I can get that vibe from you as
Yeah,
well.
what do they call it? Manifestation.
Okay. Well done. I'll call it delusion, but we can go with that. We can go with that. I still see people joining the webinar while we chat about our various delusions and the weather. But I do want to welcome everyone else again, or just take a brief second to say thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. It's really lovely for all of you to turn out. I'm really, really proud to say that this is our first CPD qualifying webinar. And so Gideon and I are very honored to have you joining us. And we hope that you'll get out of this all that you are looking for. But we are going to be asking you for feedback afterwards in order to help us improve and to do the next one even better. Having said that, the session today is about turning awareness into action. This is manager training specifically focused at HR managers and people leads. So not necessarily for line managers or individuals who are managing a team of individual contributors or other managers. This is specifically focused at HR and people professionals. And like I'd said earlier, this does qualify for CPD accreditation. I should probably introduce myself first, and then I'll ask Gideon to introduce himself. So for those with whom I've not met before, my name is Eileen. I'm the Executive Director here at Fertifa. We are a London-based organization that have been around now for about 6 years, supporting HR and people teams, managers as well, in this case, line managers, as well as employees directly with whom we liaise as patients for when they need it the most relating to reproductive, hormonal, sexual, and neurodiversity health as well. So it's a real pleasure to be joined by Gideon, and I'm going to ask Gideon to introduce himself. And whilst hopefully he'll forgive me for the multitasking, at the same time that he's doing his introduction, I'm going to share a poll, which, by the way, is required for the CPD accreditation and will help us establish the context and maybe what you're looking for. Gideon?
Okay, hi. Thanks, Eileen. I think it's really exciting doing a CPD, our first CPD event. So I'm really pleased to take part, and thanks for asking me to join. So I'm Gidon Lieberman. I'm a consultant gynecologist and subspecialist in reproductive medicine and surgery. So I deal with all things hormonal, mainly in women, but also in men. And I've been in the reproductive health space continuously since 2002. I've been a NHS consultant fertility and menopause since 2007. And I run NHS menopause clinics, fertility clinics, and uh, I'm still undertaking surgery. And I've been here with Fatifa since its outset. And it's been a great journey along the way. And most of my time at Fatifa is dealt with training, education, and helping individual clients with fertility, menopause, men's health challenges. It's been great, really enjoying it. And an important part of what I do is the education. So hopefully, we're going to sort of uh, hug you into our menopause world this morning and sort of try and give you some of our thoughts about why menopause education and support is so important for the workplace.
Was brilliant. Thank you, Gideon. I wanted to make sure everyone could hear that, so I'd put myself on mute to make sure that you are uninterrupted while I put that poll up. I really appreciate it. We've actually, I don't think I've ever seen this, by the way, in a webinar, but we have had more than 100 people respond to the poll. So I'm really, really grateful for everyone chiming in. I'll go ahead and end that poll now and then share the results so that everyone else can see along with ourselves. And as you look at this, Gideon, that actually more people than not say that their companies do not offer a menopause policy at present. And also that it's a almost even split, but I would say it's actually 44% versus 43% that companies offer additional workplace menopause support over those that do not. But there's a pretty large contingent, more than 10% of individuals who are on the call today that actually don't. So interesting, sort of a bit of a smattering. And like I said, we've had more than 100 people respond to this. So I think it's a really good sample set. But I think it goes to show that hopefully what we're going to be talking about today will cover enough for everybody, even irrespective of what they're at, sort of the stage that they're at in the organization or not. So I'm going to stop sharing that. Sorry, I keep promising that, and then I go back. And I'm going to go ahead then to the next slide, and we'll go through an agenda as well as what we're aiming to cover today. So we will tag team, but I do hope that people will ask questions as we go. As you could see, and I was fumbling it a bit there, but I promise you I'll get a bit smoother as we warm up. I will keep an eye on the chat box. Please let us know if you have questions as we go. Find it's really, really helpful for taking questions in a contextual basis as we're talking about a topic or as it's come to your mind. And feel free, of course, to just message Gideon and I directly if you want to just message panelists, and be mindful that other people will not be able to see your name given that we're using Zoom webinar unless you opt for them to do so. So what we're going to talk about first is really briefly a bit of why we're here and how menopause challenges can impact individuals at work. We'll then take a brief vocabulary lesson and have Gideon talk us through what the 4 stages, the technical clinical stages of menopause are, because from a language point of view, we will be talking about menopause and perimenopause more broadly, but we do think it's important for you to be able to understand where we're coming from and why we see or why we use those terms. There's only one slide about cultural and societal differences, only because I think both Gideon and I find that really, really interesting and a very strong reminder about how not everyone will view menopause in the same way, and why then individuals might have a different approach, might have different levels of sensitivity based on how they were raised, where they were raised, and also where your teams, your employees might be based around the world. We'll then talk about symptoms really briefly. For those that might be already a little familiar about menopause, there is a very, very long list of symptoms, but we'll try and emphasize some of the most common and how they can present themselves. We do have just one slide then on the UK regulatory landscape. Again, based on what I just said a few seconds ago, we know that many of you as HR professionals and HR managers will have teams that are outside of the UK as well. We unfortunately didn't have time to include a slide on every single country that we cover employees or patients in today, but we wanted to offer the UK as a case study, and also, of course, an invitation should people want to follow up and find out more after the fact. And then we will go into practical suggestions in terms of how you as an HR manager can support, but also can train or can educate other people across your organization and across your team in terms of how to support colleagues. So then what we hope you'll get out of this training session, bit of a recap or maybe a summation of that agenda, is obviously an understanding of perimenopause and menopause. We hope then you'll understand that there are emotional and physical impacts as a result of both perimenopause and menopause, or those symptoms, and how they can manifest themselves or impact an individual at work. We will cover the UK regulatory landscape very, very briefly, and then close with practical advice. Again, this is CPD qualifying and accredited. Did want to mention, therefore, a couple of housekeeping points on that. And we've mentioned that this is our first CPD qualifying session. So bear with us as we go through what we think the flow will be, but do feel free to get in touch if it's not to your expectations. We will be sending a list of all of you who have attended today. And like I said, it is over 100 of you, and we're grateful to have you all with us. We'll send your names and your email addresses to the CPD organization. If you expressly do not want us to share your information with them, please be sure to let us know within the next 24 hours. Otherwise, we send them a file of all of your names and email addresses so that they then follow up with and get in touch with you to make sure that you get awarded your points and your accreditation for attending this webinar. Additionally, the session is being recorded, and so we are going to make this available to those who might have registered and weren't able to attend maybe last minute, or those who are going to be watching this back after the fact. If you are watching the recording and would also like to make sure that you get your credit and your points for viewing this webinar and this teaching session, please make sure then to get in touch with us to let us know that, because as you can imagine, once we share the link of the recording after the fact, it's hard for us to know exactly who then goes and views it and who actually benefits from the training. So if you are watching this on the recording, please make sure you let us know that you've watched the full session so that we can submit your name and your details then to CPD as well. So those are the housekeeping points relating to the CPD accreditation and in terms of this training session itself. Now I just want to do one final housekeeping point with respect to language and words. Gideon and I try really, really hard to be very careful about the language that we use. We know that it matters, and you might not be able to read it, but in the very, very small text there on the bottom left-hand corner of this slide, you will see that when we refer to a woman or women, we are referring to individuals who are assigned female at birth. Having said that, we do understand, and we're particularly mindful that not everyone who was assigned female at birth might identify today as a woman or necessarily any specific gender. We recognize that, and we are here for everybody. We are not trying to be exclusive or to suggest that we're just restricting ourselves to individuals who refer to themselves as a woman. And so we do want to make sure that you know that, you hear that, and therefore will forgive us if we end up being generalizing by using those terms. In terms of talking about menopause and perimenopause, Gideon might specify this later, but we are talking about when we say every woman will go through it, we do mean every woman with continued ovarian function. Again, we don't mean to be careless or necessarily exclusionary or restrictive if that doesn't cover or a colleague or someone that you would want to support or help train subsequently that might also be interested in these topics. And then finally, because I see people have been asking the question and I appreciate them taking me up on the invitation to interact with us, we will be able to share the slides afterwards in case people do want a copy. So with that being said, I think we can go ahead and go into the content then, unless anyone else has any other questions about the flow or how we're going to work through this. And we'll just talk about why menopause matters in the how best to support individuals. So I know I'm talking a lot. Trust me, we're going to get to the bit where I'm just going to be able to go back on mute and hand over to Gideon. But before that, I thought it's worth illustrating the impact of perimenopause, menopausal symptoms on individuals in the workplace. I'm not going to read every single statistic here, but you can see that the vast majority of individuals that are going to experience perimenopausal and menopausal symptoms will really, really see an impact on their day-to-day work, their day-to-day well-being, and of course, therefore, their productivity and their contribution at work. You'll see that almost 90% will mention that they experience brain fog or difficulty concentrating and other cognitive issues. Clearly, when we talk about particularly knowledge workers or in terms of industries, which are professional services or particularly of corporates, this is going to be hugely detrimental to women who have been relying on their cognitive function for everything they do day in and day out. This relates to anyone who works and contributes to a workplace or an employer, irrespective of the type of role, the seniority, and the level. When someone starts to think that they're not remembering things quite as well, they're not really necessarily clocking things as proper as they were before, or not feeling themselves in terms of how they typically learn, how they typically collaborate, and how they typically contribute, this is going to also lead to decreased confidence, which I think is one of the really, really crucial points about how some of these symptoms ultimately present themselves. As a result, of course, you see that 50% will have decreased job satisfaction. 67% will say that these symptoms are therefore negatively impacting them. I'm not even going to mention about the more than 3/4 that experience low mood or depression. I won't go into more than that, but I'm going to now focus on the fact that 42%, so you're seeing more than 4 in 10 women will consider leaving work or dropping out of the workplace as a result of their perimenopause and menopausal symptoms. And ultimately, 1 in 10 will drop out. They will leave their jobs because of these symptoms. So clearly, what we're seeing is not only a challenge for you as an HR professional and your workplace, but it's also a greater societal challenge for all of us, whether it's here in the UK, across different countries, across the EU, or wherever you might be based. If we have 10% of perimenopausal and menopausal women leaving work as a consequence of these symptoms, we are losing that talent, we're losing those gifts, we're losing that experience, that seniority, and that impact and contribution to all sorts of lines of work and roles. So I'm not going to say anything more about these stats. I don't know if Gideon, you wanted to say more, but otherwise we were going to go into really talking about what the 4 stages of menopause were or what they are, and we'll come back to then how they might present themselves at work. Is that all right, Gideon?
Yeah, hi, thanks. So I just had to put my headphones on because the air conditioning came on. Thanks for that. I think just picking up on what you were saying there, Eileen, and this is real stuff. This is real world stuff. And this week in my NHS menopause clinic, I was talking to one of the trust employees who's left work actually before her retirement age because she just felt she didn't have the confidence to carry on doing what she was employed to do. And it was a difficult moment for me because I felt that I'd failed her in some way in that we hadn't really provided her with enough support and to allow her to continue. And I reflected on this, and then I thought, well, maybe we'd kept her going for a good while, but. I think this is real world stuff, Eileen, and these are challenges that happen across the workplace into every profession, and I think it's our responsibility as medical professionals and people in the menopause workspace to support people going through the menopause. It's so important. Now, we were talking words here, and I think there's a lot of definitions and words that people use and bandy about. In the old days, people, and we still talk about the menopause as an object, but really, the menopause defines a time, the start of a time. And let's just refresh and remind ourselves about some of these terms. When a woman is in her, what we like to think her reproductive age, requiring of contraception in the family forming years, that's what we call pre-menopause or before menopause, before her last period. And not every woman, but we'd like to imagine that women not on hormonal contraception will have regular cycles and not have the symptoms associated with the next stage, which is perimenopause. So, perimenopause is the stage when a woman begins to experience the symptoms of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone depletion as egg quality and egg number decline. Okay, so this is when symptoms start. So when a woman starts experiencing symptoms associated with menopause or ovarian decline, this is when we say she's perimenopausal. The most frequent symptom, first symptom, is changes in the menstrual cycle. So this may be elongation of the cycle, it may be shortening of the cycle, it may be heavier, lighter, more painful bleeding. So this is menstrual disorders is the most commonly expressed symptom. However, it doesn't come in isolation of all the other symptoms of the perimenopause, and we can go on to this in a minute. And these are the symptoms that really truly affect people in their day-to-day bodies, in their home lives, their work lives that we're talking about today. This is real world stuff, okay? So perimenopause is when a woman it has symptoms of decreasing ovarian function, okay? Now, I was just thinking about analogies today, and I often say that these changes don't happen abruptly. A woman doesn't just go from having regular cycles to irregular cycles. There's a merging. It's not like she gets off one train and then gets onto another train. There's overlap in the symptoms, and often these symptoms are quite insidious in onset, so that may not notice how they happen. Okay. So the perimenopause sort of dovetail, the premenopausal woman's life will dovetail into her perimenopause. And then we define the menopause as the final period a woman has. Okay, it's the final period a woman has. Um, and then we say she's post-menopausal 1 year and 1 day after that. So if a woman has her last period today, day one today of her final period, we will say that's her menopause, but she becomes post-menopausal 1 year and 1 day afterwards. And other than medical complications, that's a permanent state. And I think what's really interesting about that for me in a conceptual world frame is that women today, many women today will spend longer uh, in a postmenopausal state than they will in a premenopausal state. So a woman will be post-reproductive for longer than she's in her reproductive years. And that's the bit that really fascinates doctors because it's the implications of the low estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone state on the individual for multiple decades. And it's really fascinating. So let's just recap there. Premenopausal is when a woman's in her reproductive life, okay? Perimenopause is the transition into the time when she's experiencing the changes that lead up to menopause, the final period. And then postmenopause or menopause is the time for 1 year and 1 day after her final period. And if we get time today, I'm really happy to explore some of these concepts and what they mean. But coming back to what we're really talking about in today's world is the management and support of individuals in the perimenopause. In the old days, they used to call this the change. But when we're talking about menopause, we're actually really talking about perimenopause and the early menopausal years, where a woman will still be having periods, the perimenopause, but experiencing symptoms. Um, should I leave it there, Eileen, and I can explore some of the perimenopausal symptoms if we get time, maybe later?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Gideon, and we absolutely will do. I just thought it was really useful to talk about the 4 stages and the fact that, thank you for reiterating that when you and I are talking about menopausal or perimenopausal women, we are specifically talking about, like you said, that phase before a woman's last period. So just to reiterate again that this does affect so many people. It affects everyone with ovarian function when they get to a certain age. That is probably about 25 million women a year around the world going through then menopause. And as Gideon described it, that would be her last period. It is estimated that in the UK, 13 million women are going through perimenopause and menopausal symptoms now at any given time. Even so, no country in the world, so including the UK or across Europe, offers such strategies as a right to menopause leave or anything on a statutory basis. And we will talk about the UK regulatory landscape in a second. This is the slide that I alluded to really briefly, just to remind all of us that whilst, as Gideon alluded to, in previous times, we talk about menopause in a certain way, talking about it as the change. It's probably been discussed more widely recently, but only because people are becoming more informed about it. And so there's somewhat of a stigma, I would say, that there has been in the UK, certainly in the United States and other parts of Western Europe, but that's not the case necessarily everywhere around the world. And what I find really fascinating and interesting is that in a lot of indigenous cultures, and certainly in Far East Asia, we've seen that actually menopause is viewed in a very, very positive way. It's associated with individuals coming into their own, coming into positions of leadership, seniority, and actually power within their communities or their tribes. And so it's really important to know that maybe not everyone is going to be stigmatized by it, confused or concerned about it. Some will certainly be looking to celebrate it, but the point is not to assume that it's the same for everyone. And I also wanted to make the point that there are some positive connotations, of course, and we don't mean this to be a sort of a frightening topic or something that people should be tiptoeing around necessarily. To that end, just sharing a quote from one of my favorite actors, which is British star Gillian Anderson, and how she hopes that we'll get to a point where not only is it ultimately celebrated, but at least that we acknowledge and we really learn more about menopause and perimenopause and honor it as a life stage for women. And this session, this teaching session, this training, and all of you opting to share your time with us to learn more about it is clearly getting us to that point. So then, as you were hoping, Gideon, I thought maybe let's go back to talking about some of the symptoms, if you don't mind, and certainly how they can present themselves. Don't know if you wanted to highlight what you see most within your clinic or in your conversations with patients, or how you'd want to cover them.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Eileen. I think it's really interesting. And just to reiterate what you're saying about the cultural diversity, um, the diverse ways that people experience menopause and view menopause across the world. But I see that in my daily practice, uh, serving a very diverse community, and there's such a mix of menopause care and availability of menopause care that one tends to be quite blinkered in our approach. And one thing that you said, and it just kind of made me think a little bit about it, is that we have, in general, quite a narrow uh, approach to menopause in the UK, in the Western world. But it really doesn't mean that it's the correct approach by any stretch of the imagination. And I think that when we come to deal with, for me, patients or for the people on this call, their employees and colleagues, you've got to go in with a really open mind and actually not bring your own preset, preconceived ideas about what it means to be menopausal and the effects. And what you said there before is superb about actually it's not all negative. And I see loads of women who are overjoyed to be menopausal because the and I'm gonna the menstrual disorders, which have been a huge anchor, or downward negative aspect in their life. It goes, and you see this relief on people in various ways. So I'm gonna just reassociating what you said. There's different approaches to it, and we should come to each and every individual with new eyes, with a blank sheet about what it means to them. Okay. So, so when we think about symptoms, why do symptoms happen? Well, symptoms happen because eggs numbers and quality decrease means that an individual will produce less of the sex hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, and give the symptoms that we've included here. Now, if you Google symptoms of perimenopause, people say, oh, there's X number. I want to tell you something. There's loads and loads and loads and more and more and more. Why? Because estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone receptors, the activators of body function, are found all through uh, a woman's body. So if you've got double X chromosomes, you can have estrogen, progesterone, testosterone receptors on loads of your tissues, loads of your glands, loads of bits of your body. And this is why a drop in those in the levels of hormones affect those tissues. So in medicine, we kind of group them together. We will start from the top and we'll say brain and psychological symptoms. And that's because there are estrogen receptors on nerves and in the brain. Okay.
So if you get a drop in the estrogen levels, that affects the brain, giving maybe headaches, anxiety, rage, depression, altered mood. Okay, so brain discoordination, brain fog. I forgot my keys. So these are really big life-changing symptoms that you just can't see, but people will experience. So these are the psychological symptoms. And then we think about the vasomotor, blood vessel motor muscles, giving rise to hot flushes, night sweats. Hugely underplayed. I've seen people who describe 50, 60 hot flushes a day. It just catches them. People describe an inner heat, an inner burning heat, it's a furnace is a word I hear a lot, a furnace internally that just switches on internally, okay? Hot flushes, night sweats. These lead to what I think is one of the biggest issues in people in the workplace, and this is a sleep disorder. I can talk about sleep disorder for a long time, for myself to sleep, talking about sleep disorder. It's a massive problem because if you don't sleep properly, then you wake up unrested and you go into the rest of your day in a poor frame. So I think that in the future, we are going to be talking more and more and more about the importance of sleep and the impact of low estrogen on sleep. And I mean, Eileen's nodding there, and I know. Can I tell them that you have a sleep disorder? If I speak to any perimenopausal or menopausal or early menopausal woman, and I say, "Do you have a sleep disorder?" They will say yes. And that presents itself in different ways. It may be trouble falling asleep, what we call onset insomnia. It may be waking in the middle of the night. I just wake up in the middle of the night, get on, and I don't know why. Or it may be because they need a wee, they've got some bladder disorder, or I wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, I cannot go to sleep again, and I'm really anxious. And we call it early morning waking. So there's lots of different types of sleep disorder. Okay, and then we come on to the musculoskeletal system, the joints, the muscles. I've got achy joints. I used to, every time I walk the dog now, I've got to sit down because I'm really achy and I just don't feel right. I feel like somebody needs to put some oil in my joints because they're just not working properly. And then we come on to the menstrual disorders, which I don't really need to go on about too much. But I think what is the one that we don't have here that I think is really important and is really, really important is it's two things. It's vaginal health and bladder health, okay? Vaginal health, nobody really talks about it too much, but very important because the vaginal skin, what we call the vaginal mucosa, is exquisitely sensitive to estrogen. Drops in estrogen cause vaginal problems. The vagina doesn't then go on to produce enough mucus, enough protective agents, predisposing to thrush, predisposing to dryness during intercourse, leading to bladder problems and long-term urinary tract problems. And I think maybe we'll come back to this later, Eileen, but there was a question that said, how long do symptoms last after the menopause? And I kind of think the answer to that is you get different symptoms in different years. And one of the long-term complications of estrogen depletion is a long-term effect on the bladder. And it's not like one goes through the menopause and you're out of the woods. There are the complications of long-term estrogen depletion. And as I was referring to earlier, the bit that really interests doctors is actually the long-term symptoms of cardiovascular heart blood vessel. And then on here, we haven't got libido. Libido's a topic, it's a whole CPD course in itself, but loss of libido, multifactorial midlife. And if we got time, hopefully we can come back to talk about that in a little bit.
Thank you, Gideon. Yeah, and I absolutely don't mind. I'm very happy that you shared that I have sleeping disorder. But as you say, the consequences of the sleep and the fatigue or the ensuing fatigue clearly impacts again function at work, right? Because we're used to being a certain level of productive, whether that is low productivity or high, you get used to being a certain way for years and years and years, and all of a sudden you get to a phase in your life where you think, this is not me, this is not myself, I can't rely on myself to be able to do either as much or as little as I used to before. And so that can be incredibly frustrating. Like I said earlier, a lot of this can lead to, even if one is able to manage their symptoms or they think they're coping well, the knock-on effects to confidence and how one feels about themselves and whether or not they are themselves can be really, really impactful. At least that was the case for me. So thanks for going through all that. And yeah, we'll try and come back to some of this if we can, especially if people have specific questions. For now, then, we wanted to move on, having reviewed again the 4 stages, some of the symptoms, and I really love that, Gideon, you were able to talk about really what leads to these symptoms, or the reason for the symptoms because of the estrogen, decline or the lack of production and all of that, sort of really explaining why these symptoms end up presenting themselves. Let's bring it back then to the workplace. So we talked very early on with some of those statistics about what women are saying or reporting or responding to in surveys about how they see the impacts. Here we sort of lay it out from a bit of a bottoms-up approach, which is, if you take some of the things that we've been talking about, and you take, for example, we've already mentioned when Gideon went through the definition that the average age of a menopausal woman in the UK and in Europe was 51. You can see now that we rounded that and got to that age based on this very specific statistic, which is between 50.1 and 52.8 years of age. If you take that fact, you then combine it or overlay it to the next data point, which is that the average age of a woman in senior management position, as a senior individual, as a senior contributor, based on the FTSE Women Leaders Review, that the average age for that type of woman is 50 years old, so almost directly overlapping. You then get to the fact that the third point, which is, unfortunately, 10% of women are going to drop out of the workforce, which we already talked about. 1 in 10 are going to leave their roles. 1 in 3 might not leave their role, but they're going to look to reduce their hours. They move to part-time, they move to job sharing, they move to compressed hours, or even just a less demanding role altogether. If that's the case, clearly what we're seeing, even before I get to point 4, is that for us, again, as a society, when we talk about productivity, when we talk about investment and growth within a country, within GDP, if we've got 1 in 10 women leaving the workforce, we've got 1 in 3 of them reducing their contributions or the amount of time in which they can contribute, we are seeing a problem with productivity more broadly. We're seeing an impact. We're not benefiting from the talent, from what these individuals bring to bear for our organizations in the country more broadly, or our society more broadly. And then point 4 is, within your company specifically, you are then, as an HR leader, going to be dealing with that loss of talent, the time, the cost, the energy to backfill, to replace, to look to rearrange resources in order to accommodate. And then, of course, the fact that you have probably been working hard at building an equitable organization to try and close the gender gap, to try and show parity amongst senior leaders, irrespective of their gender or other demographics. And if you're trying to continue to push along those kinds of metrics and those kinds of aims, you're then progressively working even further, or pushing a stone uphill, because you're seeing your senior women drop out or reduce their hours. And therefore, when you backfill with somebody who doesn't have that experience, you're increasing the gender pay gap potentially. And you're seeing other types of practical day-to-day impact on the roles that you have and how it's going to impact your organization, and what really translates to time and money for the organization. So then moving on, we're just going to briefly look at what the UK regulatory landscape holds. And again, feel free to chip in, Gideon, but we don't have time to go through every single country in Europe, nor even around the world, which is where I know some of you will have employees based. But just so you know, in the UK, the landscape is evolving. So it is developing. It's important probably to be aware of this. Clearly, for those that might be Fertifa partners or Fertifa clients, we or another organization such as ourselves could continue to keep you apprised of changes, but it is changing. At the moment, there are no specific protections or standalone laws that specifically target menopause, but there will be legal protection for employees that will fall either under the Equality Act of 2010, which will protect employees from age, sex, or disability discrimination, which clearly overlaps or might be one of the reasons or relating to clearly menopause and perimenopause. And then also there's the Health and Safety Work Act of 1974, which ensures that or calls on employers to make sure that the companies provide for the health, safety, and well-being of their employees. So those are two sort of statutory frameworks by which employees might be thinking about their rights and what they should have rights to. Also wanted to flag that there were some proposed changes in the Employment Rights Bill of 2025, which was specifically going to be then for any companies and employers with more than 250 employees, about how they might need to produce what was called or titled menopause action plans, which would detail how they could, as an organization, support employees. Now, this was going to be proportionate, and of course, there's more coming on this. Like I said, it was just proposed within that rights bill, and there's no specific requirement for a dedicated menopause policy with a capital P, but that is considered best practice. And based on your answers in our poll at the beginning, we know that more of you do have a menopause policy in place than those that don't. But we just wanted to touch on this really briefly, and then understanding that you as HR professionals are thinking about how to support your colleagues, how to support your employees, and that previous slide, what you have to do with the ramifications or the consequences of what happens if we don't better support these individuals and they drop out of the workforce. So then we'll go now into the practical suggestions that we have for you. There are 2 slides here. So before people start asking about other things, just to bear in mind that we've got 1 through 10. We'll go through these step by step. And I know that Gideon's got some really, really great thoughts about a lot of these, especially from a medical or clinical point of view. But he has already emphasized this very first thing, or the very first point, which is menopause, perimenopause. This is a thing. This is a thing of very serious consequence. It is not just an individual thing. We've tried to emphasize, which is the second point, that not everyone will go through this thing in the same way. They may not experience it the same way. They may not cope the same way, and they may not react or respond in the same way. But this is clearly a thing that will affect every single individual with ovarian function as they age. And we haven't even talked about early menopause or menopause that might be brought on by medical intervention or health history, which might therefore then affect individuals as early as in their 30s. If, for example, they've had a hysterectomy, if they've had treatment for endometriosis, if they've actually undergone cancer treatment and all the like. So this will affect everyone with ovarian function. And again, not everyone will experience it the same way. So please be mindful and sensitive to that. And I've just alluded to, not everyone's going to be more than 45 years old. You don't want to make generalizations about individuals that you know are falling into the age bracket because maybe they aren't experiencing symptoms yet. But you also don't want to ignore the fact that this can affect women in their 30s. Don't be sort of, oh, I thought you're too young for that, or no, I'm surprised, I'm sure it's not menopause, or, clearly it's too early for you to be thinking about that. Please try not to dismiss it for anybody, or also be cognizant that if somebody says to you that they're going through something and they haven't realized or become aware that it might be perimenopause, it might be that you're thinking about it before they are. And so, of course, we'll come into how to support them if that's the case. As is pointed out in the second point, and the consequence of this is please be sensitive to how different reactions might be and what I've just been saying, which is you might be aware about the possibility of this being relating or their symptoms being related to hormonal changes before they are. And Gideon already said this as well, recognize that this continues to evolve. We've talked about how symptoms, when we talked about the definitions, can present themselves up to 10 years, in some cases 7 to 12 years before a woman's last period. This doesn't mean you can have one conversation with a woman who says, I'm thinking about, maybe going on HRT, or I'm thinking about whether or not I'm going through perimenopause. You can't sort of be like, oh, I spoke to Eileen 6 months ago. She's good. She's got it. Tick the box with respect to menopause, well-being support. As Gideon said, symptoms will evolve. They'll change. They'll present themselves very, very differently throughout the years. Before I go on to 6 through 10, Gideon, is there anything you wanted to add to any of these points?
Thanks, Eileen. No, I think it's just to reinforce that it's different in different people at different times. I'm just going to just do a bit of colouring in there. A friend of mine who I was at school with said to me, oh, I had my last period last year. I'm tickety-boo. It's fine. I don't know what it's all about. 6 months later, hi, Gidon, can you help me? I just feel lousy. So what I'm saying is that different times, different symptoms. I think also the history, the historical knowledge that people have. My mum went through menopause and she didn't have a problem. She didn't say she had a problem, but she probably did have problems. So what you hear isn't always what people experience. I'm not going to go on about this. Straight back to you, Eileen. I think we'll just let's get through the rest of the 10.
Okay. All right. Super. Thanks, Gideon. So then the other 5 are number 6, know your policies. So many of you, like we said in the poll, more than 50% said that you do have a menopause policy in place already, and that's absolutely brilliant. Almost the very first step, or the most important step, because that means you have acknowledged as an organization and as a company that this is a thing, which was our number 1 point, and that you're saying to employees, you know that this is a thing. Doesn't mean that your policy is perfect, doesn't mean it has to be perfect. It can't necessarily cover absolutely everything, but it means that you've acknowledged, you understand, you're aware that it's a thing, and therefore you are able and you're willing, and you've set up the basis for having a supportive conversation, dialogue, and evolution about how you want to support individuals. Again, we talked about how it's an ongoing process, but we meant that initially on the last slide about how symptoms might present themselves differently over time. It's important that you also give your organization and you as an HR professional time to then think about the process you will go through as an organization and how you support individuals. You might have individualized plans for your employees. You might therefore start with menopause champions. You might start with employee resource groups. You might start with the policy, and you might add to it over time. This is a process for an individual as much as it is for a team of people, a cohort, a company, and an organization. Point 8 is not to make assumptions. Hopefully, we've been drawing this thread throughout a lot of the different things we've been talking about, whether it was symptoms, definitions, or otherwise. Do not assume that somebody's going through their experience in the same way that someone else you spoke to, in the same way that a family member of yours has gone through, in the same way that you maybe as an individual has gone through. Do know that everybody experiences it very differently, relating to how old their mother was when they went through the menopause, their genetic mother, how old they were when they had their first period, whether or not they've had a specific health history, whether or not there are environmental factors, whether or not there are other stresses or issues happening within their lives around the same time that might contribute to other types of symptoms. So just don't make any assumptions at all, respective to age, respective to history, symptoms. Just ask how you can support. And then once you've done that, just keep listening and ensuring that you can have ongoing and open conversations, mostly ensured by point 10, which is do keep it confidential. We've talked about how it's different, or menopause is viewed differently around the world. And so different people will have different level of sensitivities. But clearly, this is a very personal transition for everybody, for individuals. It's very personal to them. The symptoms are very personal. And so what's really important for individuals, particularly if there are some cognitive, or there are symptoms that affect their cognitive function, they will not be feeling particularly wildly excited about people at work knowing about this. And I mentioned that the knock-on confidence can be some of the most difficult things to contend with, even if physical symptoms are being managed or coped really well. So keep it confidential so that the individual knows that this is a safe space, that you are genuinely there to support them, that they don't feel that they might be undermined or compromised because of them opening up or talking about what they might be going through. Anything else you wanted to add to these?
I don't think so, Adia. I think
Okay.
the only thing that I was probably add, sorry, as you were summing up there, is actually we've been talking a lot about the individual here, and it's really just that when we think about policies, I think about the workplace as a whole, and I'm specifically thinking about workplaces which are very male heavy, and actually the importance of education to everybody that's involved in the workplace, so that everybody knows about menopause, even if they're not directly going through it, because they will have people in their wider lives who are experiencing workplace. So I actually think it's about education and support, not just of the individual, but of actually everybody in the company.
That's such a great point, because that reminds me that, we have worked with organizations where they've held menopause sessions or menopause lunch and learns and had more male attendees than female attendees, because for men, it can probably seem even harder to navigate or discuss. And so wanting to inform and educate themselves is really, really important to do. And we hope that we're able to help individuals that have joined this session today who might be men as well and thinking about how they can support. So then moving on, we're going to just then try and take those 10 points about practical tips and try to synthesize them into sort of 3 key takeaways. And I think this is important because we've had people asking questions in the chat about maybe how to broach the topic, how to support somebody if they may not be aware. What if they recognize it as a possibility before the employee or the individual? How do you potentially bring this up, or how do you ask them? So I think one thing I want to convey is my suggestion, my advice, which is not clinical or medical. And so I do hope Gideon will add to this, but just as an HR professional in your role, if I were you, I would treat it as any other non-work matter that could be cause for a distraction. So for example, on a Monday morning or at the start of a week or any point during the week, if you knew somebody was moving house, for example, if you knew somebody was applying for a mortgage, if you knew somebody was looking after and caring for maybe aging parents, if you knew somebody was helping their children deal with GCSEs or A levels or leaving the home or going to uni or starting a new job or whatever it might be, or dealing with something relating to their partner, you would not go straight into, have you thought about this, 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 this? You would probably broach that by saying, how are you? How was the weekend? How are you feeling? Is there anything I can do to support you? Do you know what I mean? If we knew it was about somebody moving house, we wouldn't say, oh, how many people did you have helping you pack the boxes and did they tape them before? You wouldn't go into that level of detail. You would simply say, how is it going? And is there anything I can do to help you? Same with perimenopause and menopause. You don't need to go into, have you thought about whether or not this could be relating to hormonal fluctuations as you've aged? Like, clearly that shouldn't be your opening question. How was your weekend? You sleeping well these days? How are you feeling? Are you feeling supported at work? Is there anything I can do for you? And can I support you? Very first thing that I would suggest, just open with general support, well-being. You are there to support them. See if they will lead you down the conversation. Ask if there's anything you can do. Make sure you listen. You're all HR professionals and excellent in your work and in your field. So I know you're good active listeners. Don't try to press, don't try to insist, and do try to be very, very sensitive. Now, if you don't get anywhere after a few conversations, or you find that somebody is delusional like Gideon was about the weather turning, and they're saying, I'm absolutely fine. I'm absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong. No, I'm fine. I just need to get a bit more sleep. Usually they'll say something. I think it's unlikely that they would feign that nothing was going wrong if you've observed something. But if they've talked about sleep, or they'll give you an opening, I think, and you can say, oh, that's really interesting. Let us know if there's something that we can do to support you. After a few conversations, I think it is worth saying then, and again, either you could draw on your personal experiences, you could draw on a family member, you could say, something about, is it sort of something that could be hormonal related? Are you feeling other symptoms as well? Has this been as a result of something else that's happening outside of work? Again, I would probably broach it as generically or generally as possible without going into hormonal changes and aging. But I don't know if, Gideon, you would have any other tactics or advice for somebody that you think might not be realizing that they are going through hormonal changes and might not maybe be ready to even hear that.
It's a difficult one, and I've just been mulling over that while you were talking there, because nobody wants to it's very difficult to suggest to somebody that their behavior, their mood is related to their hormones, because it's really super difficult to suggest that to somebody. So I try to get people to come to that conclusion, for them to go down that pathway itself, and it's a very fine path. Now, as you alluded to, and as you alluded to, when we're talking with and supporting perimenopausal women, or anybody, again and again and again, people will say, nobody's listening, nobody's listened to me, I haven't been heard. So instead of the onus being on the supporter to disseminate information, I kind of see it more as a path of just listening to people and letting them come to the conclusions, providing information that they can signpost their way along their own thought pathways through good HR, through good provision of education, through your intranet or your, however you want to do it, lunch and learns, whatever. So people have that information available to them, so they can take themselves down the path rather than you leading them down the path. And I think it's a really important difference, because nobody wants to be told that it's their hormones in any way, because people find that very, very personal. So I kind of think the key here is listening and letting people come to their own conclusions about it. I don't think that I've ever seen somebody who's been told it's your hormones. I think people realize that. I think once people are supported, and it may be through talking therapy, behavioral, psychological, environmental changes, hormones, whatever, they'll say, looking back now, it was that.
Yeah.
But I think it's very difficult, and probably not the place of the HR individual to say, this is what it is. Let them come to their own conclusion, and do that by listening.
That's a great point. And you're right. I should not have said, sort of ask, could it be a hormone? I think that's terrible. What I was actually thinking was, and given you and I have talked about this before, I had a colleague with whom I worked who was insistent that it wasn't hormonal changes, but she ended up talking about how she'd had a change in her contraception, her plan with contraception, and associated with that or correlated it to that. So again, maybe it's a conversation about, medication or ongoing support or supplements or health and just general well-being. But I think you're absolutely right. It isn't the role of an HR person to make suggestions about what might be causing things that somebody's going through. Again, just like when we talk about somebody moving house, it isn't, our role to say, oh, is it because you didn't get a house that you really liked? Is it because the house is too expensive? Is it, you don't actually lead with questions, do you? You just ask how things are going, and you hope that through that conversation in that safe space, the person comes to the awareness. So thank you very much for bringing that home. I know we are, I think Gideon and I run the risk of being able to talk about this for hours and hours, but we're running out of time. And so it was really important that we wanted to share some additional signposting or some resources that might be useful to, again, all of you as HR managers, HR professionals with respect to these topics. So, I'm sure you're very familiar with ACAS, obviously, and Gov UK and the NHS will have lots of information. Clearly, organizations such as Fertifa, but others as well, it's not just us, will have more. Some people have asked about some of the stats that we shared. We do have, for example, the full report of the most comprehensive and the largest workplace menopause survey that we did in conjunction with Menopause Matters a year and a half ago on our website, as well as other resources. And of course, there are other third-party groups that will support individuals as well as companies with respect to support for individuals. Finally, one last slide. People have been asking questions all along. I'm sorry if I didn't get a chance to answer you specifically, but if anyone had questions that either I didn't answer in the chat or as follow-up or that come to mind, or you're watching this on the recording, please feel free to email us at enquiries. And I'm sorry, there's a typo in there, so we will make sure that change is made before we send the slides. Inquiries, spelled correctly, at fertifa.com if you've got any further questions. And then a final point with respect to taking it back to the CPD certificates and the accreditation. I'd mentioned we will send the organization a file with your names and your email addresses. If you do not want your name or your email address shared, please make sure that you send us a note to tell us that within the 24 hours of your viewing this. However, once you are your name is submitted to the organization, they typically look to send through certificates then within 28 days. So you will be asked to go ahead, register and get that. And hopefully you've already gotten CPD accreditation for other points. But what will happen is you will be given an email, you'll be sent an email within 28 days on how to download and access the certificate. So it might be a couple of days later than that. Bear with them if that's the case, but you can always get in touch with us. For example, if after more than a month you haven't heard, just to make sure that we submitted your name and your email address in that file. I'm sorry that we don't have time for other questions now. Hopefully I answered enough as we went along that most people are feeling that they got what they wanted out of the session. We will also be sending you a survey afterwards, mostly so that you can give Gideon and I constructive criticism, feedback and advice for how you'd like to see this improved the next time we do a CPD training session or any other topic, what you'd want to hear about next, and there's anything else you wanted to let us know about. So we do welcome your feedback and hope that you'll take the time to submit that for us. With the last few seconds I have, I just wanted to thank you, Gideon. I always enjoy our chats, whether they're one-to-one or with another 100 and odd people. So thank you so much for bringing all of your wisdom, bringing me back on track, and for helping us with that clinical view.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, Eileen, and thank you very much to everybody for attending, and just the best luck with your onward provision of menopause care.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gideon.
Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.